Hi guys, my name is Russell and I make guide and race videos for iRacing. Tonight we have got something of a bluffer's guide for the popular iRacing driving series over on the roadside called VRS GT Sprint. Basically what I've got is a small collection of tips and tactics designed to help you along if you've never driven this series before, or maybe if you've never driven a series where there's pit stops or longer drive times where you need to think about conserving tyres and that kind of thing. If any of this sounds like it might be up your street, please do consider hitting subscribe and maybe that little bell. But without further ado, let's get down to the guide. Now, probably the first thing that people ask about when they first start driving a longer series that requires a pit stop is how they manage fuel. Now, there's several ways you can go about this. You can do it the old-fashioned way. You can calculate it. You can work out your average fuel usage per lap over a stint. Um, Work out how many laps you're going to do during a certain driving period, or obviously if you know how many laps the race is going to be, and then calculate it that way on the back of a napkin. A lot of people though tend to use some software to help them along the way. Now there's lots of different options there, and you can Google iRacing fuel calculators, and you'll come up with some really great options. But the option that I use is Crew Chief. I'll link to it in the description below, but you can go to thecrewchief.org to download it entirely free. Though I do recommend donating towards the project because it is absolutely awesome, and I think you'll agree if you haven't used it already. So as you can see here, this is what you get once you've installed it. CrewChief does a lot of things. First and foremost, it's a really good spotter that you can edit to your requirements. It can know your name. It can be funny. It can be rude. It's a lot of fun. Besides spotting, it does things like voice control, so I can ask it how much fuel I've got left, how long the race has to go, what the track temperature is, and things like that. But the reason we're using it in this guide here is because of its ability to control our pit stops for fuel and tyres and things like that. So once it's installed and set up, and there's a really good forum to help you get going, it can be a little bit fiddly while you're learning the software, but once you've got it nailed down, it's really easy to use. So to make changes to the properties, you have to stop it and then hit properties. And the first category we're going to go to is pit stops and multiclass. So there is a option somewhere in the middle here that says enable iRacing auto fueling when I enter the pit during a race. We want that ticked, obviously. Um, and it really is as easy as that. There's lots of other options here to help you control your pit entry and things like that. For example, you can have a countdown timer, so the spotter talks you into your spot, counts down meters or seconds to get you there. Once we've done that, we do want to make one other small change. So we're going to go to the fuel temperature and damage category. And down here in the middle, we have additional fuel to add to finish the race. Now you're going to want to play with this. I set mine at about 0.7, so that's 0.7 extra laps of fuel I add over whatever it calculates. I do this for a couple of reasons. One, because I never want to be that guy that runs out of fuel just before he crosses the line. And two, because the fuel calculates on the fly. So if you find yourself in a lot of traffic, you're obviously going to be using slightly less fuel. If you come out of the pit stop and there is no traffic, there is no tow, then you're going to be using more fuel all of a sudden, and you might find out that you're kind of running into trouble. So I always add that little bit of extra. There is a further option so that you can calculate your full fuel requirements based on the maximum fuel usage, but I find that this way helps me make sure I finish the race, but also finish the race with the least amount of fuel possible. So that works really well. So once you've done that, you save the changes, you quit out the options, and you restart the application. And that lets you know that it's all up and running and ready to go. So once you've got your fuel calculator set up, whichever that may be, you are going to want to probably make sure that iRacing doesn't automatically start ticking fuel and tyres when you enter the pit stop, because you want your software to take care of it, unless the software setup is different to that. But in the case of Crew Chief, what we want to do is we want to go into the iRacing folder, and normally on a Windows PC that would be in your documents, iRacing, and then it's the app ini file. You just want to double click that to open it up, and if you scroll down you will find an option for pit stops. So we could have searched for it, but here we go, pit service. As it stands, my pit service options are auto reset fast repair set to 1, and that's in case I ever dip into a series where there is a fast repair, or 2, so that it's always available if I want it. And then auto reset pit box I've got set to 0, and what this does is make sure that we do not request a full pit service whenever we dip into the pits in game during a race. So what we won't have is we won't have tyres ticked, we won't have fuel ticked, and we won't also have things like clear windscreen ticked and things like that. So this way there is absolutely no danger of me going into the pits and getting a full tank of fuel, or getting tyres that I don't need, because you don't need tyres in VRS GT Sprint or any of the other sort of race series that are less than, you know, sort of 2 hours or so. You can easily double stint tyres in most conditions, and for anything sort of 90 minutes or less, you're not going to want tyres. You're going to want to conserve tyres, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So once we've set that to 0, we are going to just save that window and close it. And obviously we want to make sure iRacing is closed while we do this, and the next time we open it, those automated pit services will no longer happen. So that's awesome. Now we've got the pit stop sorted in terms of fueling and making sure we never run out of fuel, and hopefully never have too much fuel. What we need to think about is actually doing the pit stop itself. It sounds stupid, but if you're not practicing pit stops, you are going to lose time, you're going to lose positions in the race. You really want to make sure you're maximizing your speed on entry and getting out of those pits as quickly, as smoothly as you can, and that's never going to happen if you don't practice. And once you've nailed your pit entry, we need to really think about pit strategy a bit. Now, in VRS GT Sprint, you are limited to about 50% fuel in your tank at the start of the race, and that's going to get you between 2/3 and 3/4 of the way through the race. So basically what you've got is a splash and dash towards the end of the race, where you just need to grab some fuel and go. So in terms of strategy, what sort of things can you do? Well, probably one of the main things is think about when you want to pit, in terms of what the traffic's like. You know, are you coming up on slower cars? Is it lap traffic? Um, are you struggling to get past a car? You think you're a bit faster than them, but it's proven really hard to get past and making it stick. You don't want to be losing time. You don't want to be wasting time in those situations. If the pit window's open, now you might decide that actually I'm going to pit a bit early and try and undercut this guy in front of me, or these slower cars that are coming up soon. I'm going to pit early, come out on a different part of the track, hopefully get some clean road, do some really, really good laps, and by the time they pit, when they come out, they're going to be behind me. Another alternative, if you're in that situation where you're coming up on traffic, or you're struggling to get by, is you can elect to try and save some fuel. Now, this isn't easy, and it takes a lot of practice, and I do advise practicing it if you want to do it. But basically, you can do things like lifting early, coming into a braking zone to sort of like cruise down before you start braking. You can kind of slot in behind somebody and just lift during the straight, so you don't actually, you know, overspeed and get in a position where you're going to bump them or overtake them. And every time you do that, every time you're lifting early or just cruising on the throttle like 3/4, you are saving fuel. And hopefully what that's going to allow you to do, especially if you're towards the front of the race, if you're running in second and you're close behind the lead car, and you can get yourself in a position where you can save a lot of fuel, you're going to be able to take less fuel during the pit stop and hopefully come out ahead of your opponent and undercut them for the win in the pit stop. Fuel saving sounds great. It's actually quite hard to do. It takes a lot of practice. Lifting off the accelerator when you're coming up to a braking zone is actually quite discombobulating. It will throw you off your braking initially until you've practiced it for a while. I've got myself into a few scrapes that way. But yeah, try and think about the fuel stop. What can I do? Should I pit early? Do I want to stay out as long as I can because I've got a clear road? I want to use every ounce of fuel that I've got and run the car dry. Um, think about these things. It's hard to do when you're in a race and you've got traffic in front of you. It's easy to get that tunnel vision of I must get past this guy. But if you can stop and think, actually, if I get into the pit early, I might be able to undercut him, then it could serve you really well. So the final and arguably most important thing I want to talk about in this Bluffer's Guide is tyre management, looking after your tyres so they can look after you. There is nothing worse than starting a race really hard, really heavy, blowing it on cold tyres, or overdriving the car so that the tyres are burnt out in the first 20 minutes. While you might do really well in that first 20 minutes, for the other half of the race you are going to be losing a lot of time. Ultimately, you've got to try and fight that urge to get too caught up in the jostling for position towards the start of the race. Those tyres are going to take a couple of laps to warm up. You need to take it easy on those first couple of laps. In amongst that traffic, you're going to want to take it slow coming up to the braking zones anyway, because they're going to be backed up. But really, when you start jostling for position, try and keep an even hand. Try and not get carried away and overdrive the car. You will thank yourself towards the end of the race. It's better to drive for 40 minutes at 85-90% than it is to drive for 10 minutes at 110% and then have bold tyres for the rest of the race. And that's it. I hope my rough and ready Bluffer's Guide to VRS GT Sprint has been useful. If you've got any comments, please do leave them below. If you've got any tips, leave them below too. It'd be great to hear your thoughts. If this video has been interesting or useful in any way, please do consider hitting like, hitting subscribe and that little bell for more. You can catch me on my live stream a few times a week if you'd like to see some racing and some chat. Otherwise, I will be back very soon with the next track guide for VRS GT Sprint Season 4 2020. Exciting stuff. Hopefully, I'll see you on the track. Cheers.